Today's case takes us to Essex, England, home to Jennifer Cronin and her daughter Susan. Jennifer was utterly devoted to her family. She was glamorous and sociable, kind and gentle. She shared a close bond with her daughter Susan, and the pair adored each other. In 1990, Susan met Kieran Lynch. Susan was a trainee hairdresser, and in her late teens, Kieran, a bricklayer and builder, was 3 years her senior. For Susan's friends, they said he appeared to worship the ground she walked on, and they were seemingly the perfect couple. It was very important for Susan that her new husband got along with her parents, and luckily he did. The couple went on to have 2 daughters, Matilda and Molly. The girls were incredibly close to their grandparents and saw them at least twice a week. Matilda would describe her dad saying that when she was little she thought he was a generous and amazing father, but there was a different side to his personality. Deeply competitive side with him, always needing to be the best at absolutely everything and having a desperate need to control and give off an image of a picture-perfect family. He would say that he worked hard to keep up with his daughter's lifestyles and provide for his wife, but Susan said he really struggled to cope with stress and that he found it hard to express his emotions in a way that was healthy, and as a result it would often come out in anger, with Kieran destroying and breaking things. As time carried on, things did not appear to get better. Susan said his reactions would become bigger and more aggressive, especially when alcohol was involved. One of their daughters said that she had vivid memories of screaming and shouting and plates being smashed. The day after an outburst, he would apologize and try and excuse his behavior. Like many who suffer from domestic abuse, Susan said she was ashamed and embarrassed and didn't want to tell anyone what was happening to her. One of their daughters would later say, "We weren't able to let the dog outside or anything. I was just really frightened. We had a strange relationship. If I called in sick at work, he would text saying, 'Are you not at work?' I knew he was driving around. Me and my mom had a really close relationship. My dad was quite violent towards me and my mom. If he would go for my mom, I would step in. I felt very protective over my mom." His personality flicked. One minute he'd be fine, and the next he would not be okay. In 2015, the changes in Kieran were also becoming apparent to Susan's friends, with one of them saying he appeared to be withdrawn and more gaunt. He was fitting an extension for her at the time, and sometimes he would fail to turn up for work. To Susan's shock, when a credit card bill arrived, for a card that was usually reserved for big purchases, Kieran had run up a bill of about £3,000 by withdrawing money from various cash points. Susan questioned him, but he became immediately defensive and hostile, causing the tensions within the household to escalate. Things became even more serious when Susan picked up his work clothes to do a load of washing. In his pocket, she found a small straw and some cocaine. In a text message, she said to him, "No one or nothing makes you choose that shit. You choose that over your family." Kieran replied, "Please don't tell the girls it's drugs." His erratic and volatile behavior continued. On one occasion, Susan and Kieran were at home. He held a knife to his wife's throat and threatened to take both of their lives in a murder-suicide. Susan said the ordeal felt like it went on for hours. On another occasion, the loft had been rigged with a noose. In a series of text messages, Susan told him that she wished she could turn back the clock, but it was clear that they wanted different lives. They decided to separate in November 2016, and Kieran left the family home and moved back in with his parents. After 24 years of marriage, it was a difficult choice, but Susan knew she had to protect her daughters. With Kieran gone, the tension eased, and things felt lighter and calmer. It was a chance for Susan to take some much-needed time for herself and relax with her children. Susan said that it appeared that Kieran had got himself back on track, but this would all change when she moved on. After an incredibly stressful and difficult time with Kieran, things did begin to look up for Susan when she met a man called Mike. They had taken their relationship slowly, but over time she began to talk to him about her ex, the trouble she had with him and how difficult things had been. She wanted to have a clean break and a chance to start again with someone new. This also meant she had to tell Kieran and start divorce proceedings. Susan sent him a text message asking if they could meet up at McDonald's at 6:30 p.m. Kieran agreed, and knowing that Kieran was volatile and unpredictable made an already difficult situation significantly harder. Surprisingly, however, Kieran seemed to take the news of her wanting a divorce well, with Susan describing the conversation as amicable. He later sent her a text message saying, "I'm glad you have found someone." She replied saying she hoped he would find someone too. Despite, on the face of it, taking the news of the divorce well, Kieran had actually done anything but. The following day, he sent her a series of text messages. Susan responded. The situation continued to get worse. Susan also called Kieran's cousin Lisa, who soon arrived and could hear him destroying things. Kieran appeared with a hammer in one hand and a drill in the other and told Lisa to leave it alone, saying that the situation had nothing to do with her. Lisa said it didn't seem like the Kieran she knew. He soon drove away and the police arrived not long after. The two police officers went into the house with Lisa, and her husband and Susan explained the messages that she had been receiving from Kieran. Before long, Kieran was back. He got out of his vehicle and began screaming and shouting that he was going to kill Susan. The police went out into the streets and Kieran said, "You're going to need more than two of you to get me in the car." He was subsequently arrested and led away in handcuffs. He was arrested on 3 counts: possession of an offensive weapon, threats to kill, and criminal damage. The threats to kill allegation based on his text message saying he would rather have her killed was argued to possibly be hypothetical. As for possessing an offensive weapon, as Kieran worked as a builder, he had various equipment in his van, including the hammer, so in order for that to go ahead it needed to be proven he was unlawfully possessing it at that time, which they couldn't do. Therefore, he was charged with criminal damage. He denied the allegation at Southend Magistrates Court on January 29, 2018, and he was scheduled to stand trial on the 29th of March. He was released with the conditions that he not go onto Susan Street and he was to have absolutely no contact with her. Susan called him being charged with criminal damage a farce, saying that she could not believe that that was what he was being charged with. It was around this time that one of their daughters said she started feeling incredibly scared, saying that she felt the police were not taking their fears seriously. Just 12 hours after his release on bail, another call would come in to the police. A mental health team alongside police officers were sent out to speak to him, but when they arrived, he said he was fine, so he was told to contact his GP, and that was it. Despite the conditions of his bail very clearly saying he was to have no contact with Susan at all, he paid no attention to this. He called her and turned up at her house, leaving her incredibly fearful as to what he might do next. He lied to people and said that Mike, Susan's partner, had been sending him gloating messages about his love life with Susan. He also sent what initially appeared to be a series of random letters and numbers to his daughter. When she asked what it was, he said it was the registration number of Mike's vehicle. She asked why he was sending it to her and he replied, "He needs to speak with me. Okay? Tell her and her boyfriend." The incessant messages to Susan continued, "You and the girls have everything. I will always have my memories. Have you forgot? Not money, I suppose. Thanks for everything. A true lady. Enjoy." It was absolutely terrifying for Susan and frightening for her to even have her children at home alone. He would make 80 calls a day and refuse to stop contact. As he failed to adhere to the conditions of his bail, Susan contacted the police again. Susan's mother, Jennifer, also became frightened and asked her daughter if she had been to her house on Boyce Green and used the hose to add more water to her pond. Susan hadn't. She believed it was Kieran, doing it as a way of taunting them by showing them how close he could get. 7th, 2018. Mike phoned Susan, saying he could see a man going into their garage. He then headed upstairs to look at him out of the bedroom window, whilst trying to stay hidden behind a curtain. He could see a silver van parked in the driveway, and Susan asked him to read out the registration number, and then begged him to stay inside. The van then drove off. About 10 minutes later, Mike went into the kitchen and there was no electricity. The police later arrived and it was discovered that the electric had been cut. Kieran sent gloating texts saying, "I hope your day's been great, honey," with 3 kissing emojis. Kieran's harassment continued to escalate and he would call Susan incessantly, refusing to move on. The police still hadn't acted even though they had said they would arrest him. Detective Superintendent Stephen Jennings, the lead for stalking and harassment for Essex Police, who was not involved in the case but spoke about it in a documentary, would later say that as the police received hundreds of calls per day and no direct threats of violence had been made, it was deemed that there was not much risk to Susan, so staff were not deployed. He would add that in hindsight there was a failure to see this for what it was: stalking. Susan said, "Each time I called, someone came to take a statement. It would take hours. They would promise they'd get it sorted and then nothing ever came of it. Each time I called, it was as if it was an entirely new case." So the police never put a full picture together of how badly things were escalating. Basic things like filling in a form to record the presence of children in the home, which should have prioritized our case, and had it escalated to a more serious level, wasn't done. On the 11th of March, Kieran made an internet search for the most flammable liquids. The following day, Susan's house phone rang with one of her daughters answering it. It was Kieran. His daughter said the police were out looking for him and his response was to laugh. He then for the first time extended the threats to his child by telling her he would her up. Kieran was added as wanted to the police national computer. Officers were dispatched to try and find him. So the first place they tried was his address at Chuck's Road in Canvey. But he wasn't there. As the search for him continued, it was advised that their daughters should not stay at the house. So one went to a friend's house and another went to Jennifer's. Jennifer and her granddaughter watched television together before heading to bed. When the lights in the house were turned off, the phone immediately began to ring. Susan's daughter called the police before calling her mom. She was terrified that Kieran was outside. She said he was in the garden and she didn't want to get up. Jennifer had become so terrified she had locked herself in the bedroom. Susan called the police at 1:50 a.m. Susan's daughter also called the police again, and she was advised to unplug the phones from the sockets. Despite the threats being made, the police said they did not have the manpower to send a unit out. But the threats just didn't stop. Kieran's texts were still abusive and cruel, referencing Susan's late father. "Thanks you bitch. Hope you see your dad soon. Kiss." At 4:10 a.m., he sent her another text message, which was just a single kiss. Over a 24-hour period, the police had been called 6 times. 13th of March, 2018. That morning, one of the couple's daughters woke up to a text message. It was from her father, Kieran. It read, "Love you no matter what they say, kiss." She didn't reply. Also that morning, the police had reassessed the case and it was downgraded from high risk to medium risk. Medium risk means that there may still be a risk of serious harm, but that it might not be imminent. Jennifer had locked herself in her bedroom because of how terrified she was of Kieran. Her granddaughter, who had spent the night with her, left the house and Susan knew she needed to go round to be with her mom. She let herself in and locked the door behind her. Susan encouraged her to carry on with her day, adamant that she was not going to be bullied or allow her family to be bullied by a man who simply could not accept that their relationship was over. Jennifer and her dog headed out into the garden and Susan watched them through the window as she made a cup of tea. Susan called Kieran's boss to try and find out if he knew where he was. He didn't. She then got a call from the police about their investigation. Then, without warning, at 10:48 a.m., Kieran turned up. Susan called 999. Kieran had been running with a knife as he screamed and shouted, swearing and being abusive as he ran towards Jennifer. His arm was on fire. He was also carrying a petrol can and threw liquid onto Jennifer's head, face and back. Jennifer cowered and screamed as he continued to pour the liquid onto her. Susan ran down the road screaming for help. As she got to the bottom of the road, she turned around and noticed that he wasn't behind her. It was then that 2 neighbors came out and told her, "Don't go round there. There's 2 burned bodies." Kieran had doused himself and Jennifer in fuel and then set them alight. Susan immediately ran back to the house. Susan said she had no eyebrows, no eyelashes. All her hair was burnt off, her hands were red raw, her face, everything was sort of black. Despite her horrific injuries, Jennifer was able to speak, telling her daughter how much she loved her and that she and her granddaughters were her world. Susan later said she wasn't going anywhere and that she was going to be alright. Kieran had also been seriously hurt, suffering major burns across his body, and he had ended up slumped against the wall in the garden. Susan described him as red raw and struggling to breathe. She said, "Realized he was sitting absolutely burned. I did get up and scream at him and what he's done to me and the girls." The police, fire and ambulance service were quick to arrive on scene, alongside the air ambulance that landed at the local golf course. Kieran was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and he and Jennifer were taken to hospital. It was later discovered that Kieran had bought a bucket and jerry can before going to a petrol station to buy fuel. 2 hours after the attack, Susan was taken in for questioning. Staff at the hospital told Susan that Kieran was not going to survive the night, as the extent of his injuries were too severe, after having 97% burns across his body. For Kieran's daughters, it was an absolutely impossible situation to be in. One of their daughters said that he was still her father, and she wanted to be able to say goodbye to him, tell him that she loved him, and that she wished it hadn't come to this. Kieran Lynch died that evening. A toxicology report found that he had both alcohol and cocaine in his system. Jennifer was taken to Broomfield Hospital's burns unit and was admitted into intensive care, with burns across 33% of her body. The burns were mostly on her upper torso and head. She was taken into surgery, but reconstruction was impossible due to the nature and extent of her injuries. It was decided that she would be instead given end-of-life care. She held on for 17 days. But tragically, on the 30th of March 2018, at 1:32 p.m., Jennifer Cronin died surrounded by her family. Dr. Benjamin Swift carried out a post-mortem at the hospital, confirming that her cause of death were complications from the horrendous burns she had suffered. For Susan, this had purposely been done by Kieran purely to hurt her, knowing how close she was to Jennifer and how much they meant to each other. Monday, January 21st, 2019. A week-long inquest was opened at County Hall Chambers in Chelmsford. Susan said that when she went into the inquest, she was just angry with Kieran for what he had done. But as the facts emerged about how poorly it had been handled by the police, she became more angry with them. I felt like he was upping the ante in what he was doing. Each incident I reported, he wasn't arrested, she said. Susan's partner Mike also spoke about the stress and worry caused by Kieran's behavior. The jury at the inquest concluded that Jennifer had been unlawfully killed and that Kieran had died by suicide. It also found that poor communication by the police had factored into it. Susan gave a statement saying, "It's been a horrific year, really, to be pushed from pillar to post, and we felt all along that we weren't being listened to and that things weren't being done as they should be, and now that result means we can see it in black and white. We tried our hardest to get them, the police, to sit up and take notice, but couldn't understand why nothing was being done. I would hope the police have learnt from these mistakes. It doesn't bring my mom back or their dad, but things definitely need to be looked at. They are supposed to protect and serve the public, and they certainly didn't do that for us." For Susan, the failures by the police to act on the concerns about Kieran meant that it could have been prevented. The police didn't protect us. We were shouting and screaming and waving it in their faces, and the failings were shocking. If they had done their job properly, my mom would be here. The inquest found 5 areas of police failings that were contributing factors to Jennifer's death, and that attempts to arrest him weren't made in a timely and efficient manner. Following the findings of the inquest, several officers received management action training and record to record keeping and processing of information. No police officers faced misconduct action. In March 2019, the Independent Office for Police Conduct found there had been a lack of positive action from officers, as well as a lack of clarity over domestic abuse offenses. A domestic homicide review was also set up, and the police were criticized for allowing Kieran to not be identified as the danger he posed, or that his behavior amounted to stalking. It also said there was an absence of proactive responses to breaches of bail and a lack of understanding of which officers should be responsible for this. It was later announced that Susan was taking legal action against the police, hoping they would accept legal liability for their failures in her dealings with them. She said, "Would just like the police to take proper responsibility. I feel so strongly that this could have been prevented if the police had done their jobs properly. I was going through hell and it just wasn't taken seriously. I've been left a single mom with no help and no family left. It's not easy. I'm disgusted by the failings of the police in all honesty." Detective Superintendent Stephen Jennings said, "I have met Susan Lynch and apologized to her for what happened in 2018. I have personally invited her to come and talk to our new teams. We are a far stronger force than we were 5 years ago in every way." Mike said Susan often suffers from flashbacks and wakes up screaming and crying. The absolute horror of what Susan and her family experienced is almost impossible to put into words, and the terrifying series of events that unfolded in front of her eyes are too awful to comprehend. Susan said, "Watching my mom get burned alive by my ex-husband and being helpless to intervene was exceptionally disturbing. She didn't deserve such a painful and traumatic death. Mom still had lots of years to live and plenty of love to give her grandchildren. My poor girls have got to live with this forever. Thankfully, they have lovely memories of the person their dad used to be. To try and find the words to end a case like this is almost impossible. The trail of devastation and destruction left behind is quite simply unfathomable. Jennifer Cronin should still be here, enjoying life and spending time with those she loved most. Her life was ended in a way that is too horrific to even think about. And for those left behind, life will never, ever be the same. When we lose someone we love, we must hold on to those good memories and keep those happy times close and hope that with the passage of time, there will be an opportunity for healing." The sleepy town of Hamburg, New York, home to about 60,000 people, with many making the move there with the intention of raising a family and settling down for life. The Wells family were just the same. Lawrence Wells Jr., known to everyone as Larry, was happily married to his wife Jill, and they had a 4-year-old daughter, Maddie. The couple had just found out they were expecting their second child too, another little girl. Larry and Jill had been high school sweethearts, meeting at 15 and dating shortly after. They went to college together and Larry focused on teaching. He had always wanted to work with children, and after getting his master's, he started working as a substitute teacher and mentor. Jill said if he had a little kid who had problems at home, He would take them under his wing and make sure they had the best possible life they could have at school. Sadly, however, due to the economic conditions at the time, no school was able to offer Larry anything permanent and could only carry on doing things on a temporary basis. Jill said they were ready to buy a house and start their family at this point. So her husband knew that as much as he loved teaching, he needed to get something more solid. A little deflated but undeterred, he went straight into the job hunt and started working his way up the retail management ladder. He soon found a position that he thought would suit him perfectly. Larry was a big kid at heart. He loved toys, gaming and gadgets, and working with and spending time with children was something he enjoyed. So when his local Toys R Us was looking for a new assistant manager, Larry went for it. It was certainly a different pace than what he was used to, but Larry took the long hours, overnight shifts, and weekend and holiday working in his stride. He said he loved seeing the kids come running through the doors, dragging their parents by their arms and pointing down the aisles at all the toys. With a 4-year-old daughter himself, it just made him happy. When he wasn't in his store, you could find him taking Maddie to a Chuck E. Cheese or having long walks on the beach with Jill. He just liked the simple things. On the morning of June 29, 2013, the Hamburg Toys R Us was about to experience one of their busiest mornings. New lines were coming in and the delivery was big. On days like this, the store would be open as early as 1 a.m., right the way through until closing time. Today, it was Larry's delivery shift to manage. He woke up at around 3 a.m. and set off. At 8 minutes past 4, Larry let the delivery driver in to start unloading the stock. At 4:30 a.m., the same driver was let out via the back door, and Larry carried on with his morning. Just before 5 a.m., 2 employees named Richard and Anthony arrived to start their shifts. There was always a radio left outside so that people could let management know when they arrived. The manager would then let them in, but lock the door straight away. Richard and Anthony radioed Larry, but they got no response. Richard walked around the side building where he found an open door. This was surprising as all exterior doors were always locked. He clocked in and entered the store anyway, alongside 2 of the coworkers who had the same idea, Isaac and Cindy. The delivery needed working and everyone just carried on. Perhaps Larry was still checking off the delivery or on a conference call. The store was so big after all that they could all often go hours without even bumping into each other. But a few minutes later, the store alarm started to go off. The first thing that Larry would do when he started his shift was deactivate the alarms. With still no answer on the radio, Cindy headed off to try and find him. The noise was starting to annoy everyone. Suddenly, over the piercing wail of the alarm came a scream. Cindy had walked into the office and found Larry slumped in his chair. The phone was beeping and off the hook, and he was bleeding heavily from his chest. It looked like a gunshot wound. Under the fair assumption that a gunman might still be inside the building, the employees ran out of the store and a frantic Cindy called 911. Armed officers arrived quickly and tentatively entered the store, fully prepared for a standoff with a shooter, but they couldn't see anyone around. Moving into the office, they found Larry clinging to life with a very weak pulse. It was not a gunshot, but 3 stab wounds to his chest. He was bundled into the ambulance, but tragically just before he reached the hospital he succumbed to his injuries and died. A SWAT team was now in the building and it was confirmed that whoever had killed Larry was definitely no longer there. For something like this to happen in a locked building full of cameras with people inside and working, the whole situation was even more shocking, especially to have happened to someone like Larry. Journalists and detectives said that the crime rate in Hamburg was as close to non-existent as you could get. So something like this was jarring. They didn't know whether Larry had unlocked the door by mistake and it was a chance intruder, or if it was a worker with their own key. In terms of who would want to kill Larry, it went without saying that he had no bad blood with anyone and no disgruntled employees. Going into the office, they noted that nothing really seemed out of place. It looked exactly how you'd expect an office to look. It didn't look like anything had been taken and no drawers were open. But looking around Larry's desk, they did spot that the main cable for the CCTV system had been pulled out. A 2007 University of Florida Gators cap had also been left on the floor too. This definitely seemed out of place and it did have a lot of DNA on it to be able to test. The 4 employees at the Toys R Us at the time were pulled in for questioning right away and the police were on the fence with everyone. Isaac was nervous under investigation. Richard had arrived late to work with no alibi for where he was before. Cindy had been the first to find Larry, and Anthony actually refused to answer any questions, which seemed odd. Believing that the baseball cap was a key part of finding Larry's killer, they took DNA swabs from all 4 of Larry's coworkers to compare to it. It was confirmed that the same DNA on the hat was also a match to the DNA found on the cable which had been pulled to stop the camera's recording. But this DNA was not on the police's file. Jill said as heartbroken as she was, the support that was coming in for her and Maddie via social media was so lovely and overwhelming. Toys R Us employees nationwide, as well as people with no connection to Larry at all, were sending their love, and reading all the nice things that people had to say was putting a smile on her face. The Facebook page had almost 3,000 supporters in just a few days. The head of loss prevention for the region was Bernard Groucher, who went by Bernie, and he was soon called into the store by head office. He was ready to help the police with the cameras and check over the building. He was a frequent face in that particular Toys R Us, and Larry knew him well. The cameras showed that at around 4:20 a.m. someone had been lurking outside the front door for a few minutes before getting inside. It was unclear whether they had forced the door open or unlocked it. They entered the store in dark clothing covering their face. Experts felt confident that it was a man. But apart from the hat, there was nothing they could make out. They had done a good job of concealing themselves, and the camera quality was poor at best. Larry's killer started moving quickly through the aisles, zigzagging around. He was careful to avoid some of the cameras, and he was hard to keep track of. On one camera, though, they could make out him wearing the same cap that was left in the office, and he was carrying a huge knife in his right hand. At 4:32 a.m., the person moved into the office. The door was open and Larry was not inside. 7 minutes later, at 4:39 a.m., all the cameras stopped recording, and this was the moment the cable had been pulled out. There were no cameras inside the office either. Larry entered just after this and walked right into his killer. They all stood there looking at the black screens, helpless, with no clue as to where to look next. Bernie burst into tears, telling officers that Larry was more than a colleague. He was a friend of 6 years. Bernie had even been the one to interview and hire him. Detectives could definitely say one thing with certainty now. They were sure the suspect knew the store's layout before he went in. It seemed so unlikely that a random intruder would risk doing something like that, with all of the lights in the store on, knowing that there had to be people inside working. But investigators had taken DNA from dozens of employees at this point and hadn't gotten a match to anyone. Despite the initial feelings and possible suspicions they had about the 4 people working there that morning, through DNA testing they totally ruled out Richard, Anthony, Isaac, and Cindy. They had lost their boss and friend and found him dying. What happened unsettled all of them, so it was no wonder they were nervous and didn't really want to talk. Authorities were hitting a wall though, as good as it was that they were ruling people out. They weren't adding any suspects to the list, and things were coming to a grinding halt. It had now been 3 months since Larry was killed, and Jill along with the police were worrying that it might not get solved. Police in Hamburg were scared that someone could not only have got away with murder, but they were still out there walking the streets. Jill said all she could do was sit by the phone and wait. Larry's 36th birthday came and went, and then there were all the holidays coming up. Larry loved dressing up with Maddie for Halloween. Then would be Thanksgiving and then Christmas. All of these things she had to help their 4-year-old through as well, who didn't really understand what was going on. And then Jill would be having her second baby without her husband by her side. It was a very vulnerable and scary time for her. Policemen are desperate and enlisted the help of the FBI. Knowing they needed more resources, they suddenly realized they were missing a DNA swab from one person. Someone that was around the store a lot. Someone that had been helping the police from the start with the investigation, 38-year-old Bernie Groucher, the regional loss prevention manager, and now that they thought about it, he had avoided participating in the DNA test several times, and often for silly reasons. Police called Bernie again, asking for a quick meeting for a sample. It seemed unlikely that he would be involved, but ruling him out was still a good thing to do. Bernie said he would, but he was at a Toys R Us conference and would get back to them. They then called the Toys R Us head office asking when the conference was over and when they could expect him back in Hamburg. Their stomachs dropped when the person on the phone replied, "Conference? There is no conference." It was clear that Bernie wasn't going to be coming to them anytime soon, so they needed to go to him. A few days later, they tracked him down at his father's house, and fortunately he was there. But he didn't seem nervous at all, and was happy to cooperate. And just 20 seconds after they knocked the door, they had their swab. A quick turnaround in testing left everyone stunned. It was a match to the baseball cap and the cable. Was it really possible that the person who had been so keen to help, so willing to show them the cameras, the man in charge of security for the region and someone who had sat and cried with Larry's family at his funeral, was his killer? They wasted no time and headed back to interview him. When asked about the DNA on the power cord, he said this was silly to even question given the fact that it was his job to look at the cameras in all stores, and this occasionally involved unplugging things to reboot them. His DNA being on the cable was nothing, and they could probably find it on all the cables in all the offices in all the stores. But the ace up their sleeve was the baseball cap. Bernie said he hadn't got a clue. He didn't know of any such cap. Police offered him an out, asking if it was some sort of argument that had got out of control. Bernie started panicking. Realizing that this was going from bad to worse for him, he said he needed a lawyer, and the interview came to an end. He was so adamant that he had nothing to do with this, and with no motive standing out as to why he would want to do this, it was a worry for detectives. Had they got this all wrong? But to everyone on the outside, Bernie's life was a stark contrast to the reality, and this motive would soon become clear. Everyone thought that Bernie had it all. A gorgeous, recently renovated home which he shared with his wife and 2 children, new cars on the drive, and a great job with a fantastic salary and lots of benefits. But he was actually well over $1 million in debt, and his wife Heather had kicked him out, obtaining a restraining order against him in the process. He had pushed and shoved Heather, ran upstairs and shot the gun. She found him face down on the floor. When she rolled him over, he said, "I wanted to see if you still loved me." She described his behavior as violent and bizarre. And after he moved out of the house, he started renting a new place with his girlfriend. His house was full of brand new sealed toys and expensive electronics, all boxed up and labeled and all stolen from various Toys R Us stores up to hundreds of miles away from Hamburg. He had been selling it all on eBay, making around $200,000 so far. And being part of the regional management team, getting access to any store whenever he wanted was not hard for him. After all, who was going to look at someone in charge of security as a threat or problem? Given how brazenly he had marched around Larry's store that morning, knowing there would be people working a delivery showed just how confident he had become with his scheme. They also found a memory card which showed Bernie filming various Toys R Us stores with a secret camera, scouting out the stock and camera locations. In July 2014, faced with a concrete case against him, Bernard Groucher finally pleaded guilty, but to the charge of manslaughter instead. Through his lawyers, he said that killing was never the intention. Larry was essentially collateral damage in his plan to steal from the safe in the store. Bernie said he had planned it all from the start. He tried to make it look like he didn't have the keys when he got to the front door that morning, spending a few minutes outside pretending to force it open, to throw police off the scent. When Larry entered the office, Bernie came at him from behind the door, brandishing the knife and telling him to open the safe. But Larry instantly lunged at him, fighting him back and refusing to open anything. Larry tried to grab the scarf covering his face and in the process knocked his cap off. Bernie then stabbed him 3 times and fled the office, just as Larry fell to the chair, grabbing the phone to try and call for help. His friends said that it was Larry all over. His colleagues were his friends, and he would have fought back to protect not only himself, but them as well. Little did he know that the person who had done this to him was someone he called a friend. Bernie's lawyer said, "At the time my client committed this offense, he was trying to get money to support his family. He did not anticipate encountering Larry Wells. The death was the result of an unfortunate encounter in an enclosed space. He knew Larry Wells. Larry Wells was a friend of his. He had no desire to see Larry Wells harmed. But it had to be noted that he had turned up to the store with a knife. This indicated that he was at least prepared to use it. Why bring it otherwise? One detective said it is common for burglars to not arm themselves and to use stealth. They are there to either steal money or property and get out, as opposed to robbers who announce themselves, who come in with guns blazing." Bernard Groucher was sentenced to 25 years plus 5 years probation. This was the maximum length of time he could get, and the judge said the maximum was absolutely the only option. Larry's joys and loves in life were simple: his job and his growing family. When he woke up that early morning, it was a work day like any other, and by mid-afternoon he would be home again, ready to take his daughter out for dinner and play games. It was such a totally senseless and heartbreaking killing, at the hands of someone Larry not only trusted as a colleague but saw as a friend too. Matt Chandler, a local journalist, had followed the case closely and talked to a lot through her grieving process. With a young daughter of his own, he told Jill he couldn't imagine having to explain that a parent wasn't coming home. Jill said that she and Maddie had written little letters to him, sending them to heaven in balloons. This inspired Matt to write a book about helping children to grieve and understand death. It was called Balloons for Heaven, and the illustrator put Larry, Jill, and Maddie in there together as a tribute to a wonderful father, husband, and friend. Larry's drawing had wings and was wearing his favorite football team's jersey as well. The book came out on the 1-year anniversary of his death, and Matt donated all the money made from the book launch to Jill and their girls. Before he died, Larry said he liked the name Peyton for a girl, so Maddie gained a new sister, Peyton Larry. Everyone says Maddie not only looks like her father, but has his personality too. Jill said, "I lost my husband, my best friend, the man who I love so much. We were supposed to grow old together, raise our children together and watch them grow up. But instead he was taken from us. Our daughter lost the best father she could have. They did everything together. She doesn't understand how someone could take her father from her. I want to make sure she remembers all the memories, and I'll keep showing her all the pictures and telling her stories so she always knows how much her dad loved her. He was amazing. Sonia Carmen Hyroke Stone was born on the 27th of May, 1951. Sonia, who originally lived in Quebec, Canada, moved to the United States in the 1970s, where she afterwards got married to Michael Stone in 1976. The union produced a female child. However, Sonia's marriage to Michael Stone did not last long, as they both divorced and went their separate ways. In the year 1980, Sonia Carmen Stone was a single mother living alone with her 4-year-old daughter while she worked for the Levi Strauss Company. On October 15, 1981, Sonia took her daughter to school and ran a few errands before she returned home. Around 12 p.m., a lady named Caroline McBride, who was a friend to Sonia Carmen, visited her at home after calling her multiple times and getting no response in return. On getting to the Carmel Point area of Monterey County, California, where Sonia lived, Caroline found the dead body of her friend, Sonia Carmen Herrick, just inside the front door that opened into her living room. 30 years old, Sonia Carmen Herrick appeared to have been sexually assaulted. She was spread out on the floor with her purse and the content in it spilling close to her body. Sonia was half-dressed and had been strangled with a pair of her own pantyhose, which was found tightly wrapped around her neck. Her shirt and jacket were torn and pulled back. A terrified Caroline placed a call through to the Monterey County Sheriff's Office, who immediately dispatched officers to the crime scene. The investigators were of the opinion that the position where Sonia was found in her home suggested that she was attacked as soon as she opened her front door to go in. They also examined Sonia Carmen's body and discovered that she had a broken left ring fingernail with blood beneath it, which indicated that she had struggled with her killer, ultimately scratching him before her death. The question of who committed such heinous crime bugged the police and the family of Sonia Carmen Herrick for years. By the next day, in a bid to find answers, the police went about the neighborhood asking questions and interviewing those who responded to the knock on their doors. While in the neighborhood, just across the street to Sonia Carmen's house, one of the detectives interviewed a neighbor whose name is Michael Scott Glazebrook. He was 25 years old at the time, and he had a 3 to 4 inch vertical scratch down his right cheek, which the detective noticed. The detective immediately asked him how and when he got the scratch. Glazebrook, however, made inconsistent statements. He told the detective he got it from cutting plexiglass in his garage, while he told his parents that he got it in a fight at Monterey Peninsula College, where he schooled. Due to his inconsistency, Michael Scott Glazebrook was charged with Sonia Carmen's death in 1982. But when the case went to trial in 1983, the jury came back with a 9-3 not guilty verdict, which made the district attorney's office decide not to retry the case, even though a retrial was possible, regardless of the jury's decision. Michael Scott was, however, discharged and acquitted. With no significant DNA technology in the 1970s, the case could not be pursued and it went cold for 39 years. In the year 2020, detectives at the Monterey County Sheriff's Office and Deputy District Attorney Matt L. Huro re-examined the Sonia Carmen Stone's case. They found out that there were several pieces of evidence in Sonia's case file that could be now tested utilizing modern DNA technology. These pieces of evidence, including the DNA found under Sonia's broken fingernail and right breast, were sent to the Department of Justice DNA laboratory for testing. Since Michael Scott Glazebrook was the #1 suspect on the list of the investigators in 1981, detectives got a search warrant for a new sample of his DNA. They were able to obtain a new DNA profile easily because Michael Scott Glazebrook was still alive and works in Monterey County. After the DNA sample from Sonia Carmen Stone's crime scene was tested and compared with the DNA sample gotten from Michael Scott Glazebrook, it immediately came out as a match. Detectives then conducted surveillance at Michael Scott Glazebrook's residence in the city of Seaside. Around 8 p.m. on the 14th of August 2021, Glazebrook drove away from his home. He was, however, stopped and taken into custody. In honor of Stone, all detectives wore Levi's jeans during the operation to arrest Michael Scott Glazebrook. After an 8-day jury trial in 2023, Glazebrook, who is now 67 years old, was convicted of the murder of Sonia Carmen Stone and will be sentenced in April, possibly facing a potential lifetime prison sentence without the possibility of parole. Following Glazebrook's convictions, Sonia Carmen Herrick Stone's daughter, who is now 44 years old, said, It's been a day that we have been waiting for a really long time. Sonia was a wonderful woman and we're so happy to see justice for her. The 18th of March, 2018, Riverview, Florida. Just before midnight, a 911 call comes in to the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department. A male voice could then be heard coming in and out of the background, and at one point the dispatcher heard the man shout, "She killed me. She killed me." They got a partial address from the woman, but after 4 minutes the call ended. Authorities set off to the house in question, 13248 Pike Lake Drive. As they were on their way, neighbors were calling in too. The woman who made the call ran to her neighbor's house and banged on the door before being followed out by the man holding a shotgun. People started coming outside too as they heard the commotion. One man watched in horror as the man grabbed her and started beating her with the gun. James Gray awoke to the same screams. He looked through the peephole and saw the man standing over the woman, who was now lying face down on the ground just outside his house. He told his fiancée to call 911 and asked if she knew them. She said she recognized the man as Ronnie O'Neill. James walked outside as O'Neill was standing over the woman gripping her arm. Before James could say anything, O'Neill started yelling at him that he didn't understand. "She killed me. She killed me," he kept saying, before dropping the woman's arm and walking back inside. Deputies arrived at the house at 11:49 p.m. to find her still lying in the yard. She was pronounced dead at the scene. As they turned around to the neighboring house, they saw that flames were starting to build inside. The house was on fire. As they approached, the garage door started to open and O'Neill stepped out and started walking towards them. They ordered him to stop and get on the ground, but he ignored them. They eventually had to taser him and force him into the police car. While inside the car, he was agitated and shouting about Kiki being the devil and said, "The kids are the devil's kids." As they started forcing entry into the burning house, a young boy came staggering out. Blood was coming from his mouth and he was covered in stab wounds. He was smoldering from the fire and one detective said it looked like he had been disemboweled because the injuries to his torso were so severe. He said, "My dad killed my mom," as he collapsed to the ground. One firefighter finally got inside and started sliding along the wall using his hand to guide him. The smoke was so thick he couldn't see an inch past his face. Suddenly he slipped and fell to the floor. It was totally soaked in blood and knives were scattered around everywhere. He put his hand out slowly and suddenly felt someone else. It was a young girl, bleeding heavily and on fire. He carried her outside and placed her on the ground before another firefighter rushed over to him. The girl had been attacked so badly she was totally unrecognizable and was almost decapitated. The firefighter said he just burst into tears, having to be held up by his colleague. Detective Mike Blair was now hurrying to the call out. He'd been in the force for years and had responded to hundreds and hundreds of these, but this one would completely change his life in so many ways. When he got there, the 7-year-old boy, who they now knew as Ronnie Jr., was being airlifted to hospital and the medics said there was a high chance he wasn't going to pull through. He had been stabbed 20 times and the two people that were dead were his mother and sister, 33-year-old Kenyatta Barron, who went by Kiki, and her daughter, 9-year-old Renivia Neal, who people called Nivi. The man in handcuffs and on his way to the station was Ronnie O'Neill III. 33-year-old Kiki was his on-off girlfriend and Nivi and Ronnie Jr. were their 2 children. Kiki had been stabbed, shot with a shotgun and beaten, her cause of death being listed as blunt force trauma, and Nivi had been attacked with a hatchet, shot in the neck and set on fire. He had also stabbed his son repeatedly before setting him on fire and pouring gasoline everywhere else. At 4 a.m. O'Neill went into his first interview with police. He was being held without bond and police needed to determine what on earth had happened. He was very vague and not really present. He couldn't tell them the day all the time and questions like, "Do you have any brothers or sisters?" seemed very confusing for him. He had joined the Reserve Officer Training Corps and was working odd jobs as a truck driver and in a gaming house. In 2010, he joined Build Your Community, also known as BYC, a local social work group. BYC worked in impoverished neighborhoods, mentoring the youth. Realistically, based on everything everyone had seen and heard on the 911 calls, they already had enough to charge him, but they were hoping he would give them more. As they carried on talking to him back at Pike Lake Drive, it was just a sea of yellow tape and flashing lights. Kiki Barron had recently gone back to school and was enrolled at Hillsborough Community College. Her son Ronnie said she was a great mom, always saying how proud she was, always playing with them, especially football in the garden. She was a great cook and he said that she made the best bean pie and chicken wings. Kiki's mom Carrie said that she was her children's biggest cheerleader. She doted on them and every wall in the house was absolutely full of photos. After a tough few years she ended things with O'Neill. But against Carrie's wishes, she had offered him a place to stay for a few months while he sorted himself out. 9-year-old Nevi had been born prematurely and had autism and cerebral palsy. She couldn't walk and was nonverbal, relying on a wheelchair and bits of sign language that she knew. Her brother learned some sign language as well to be able to talk to her and said his sister was regularly being recognized in school because of how happy she was and how hard she always tried. She was obsessed with eating Oreos, loved colorful clothes and earrings, and had a different bow for her hair every day of the week. Detective Mike Blair was gathering information and with 5 children of his own. He said everything about this hit very hard. No amount of training could prepare you to walk into something like that. Against all the odds, 7-year-old Ronnie survived after being rushed into surgery. He had undergone skin grafting over 30% of his body. His lung had collapsed and he was relying on a ventilator and a feeding tube. Detective Blair went over to check on him and ended up staying, putting on a movie to comfort him as he drifted in and out of sleep. When Ronnie was well enough to talk, he told them everything he could remember. His story was the same years later, which can be heard in this recorded interview. The next thing he remembered was a mask being put on his face and waking up in hospital. There was a long history of domestic violence and incidents in the household, and Kiki had been calling 911 for years. When the couple were together, they fought regularly about money, about O'Neill's lack of respect for her belongings. She would often tell him to leave the house and he would refuse, almost always resulting in him completely losing it and rampaging through the home. He would take her car without her permission, and when she asked him to stop, he took the car jack, threw it at the windshield and said that if he couldn't drive it, then no one could. The police were called out to the house after this, but it was logged as misdemeanor criminal mischief. Kiki accepted a request for prosecution form from the deputy, but she didn't submit it. O'Neill had a long history with the law that went beyond this, everything from drug-related charges to driving without a license and fraud. In the months before this, he had been involved in a drive-by shooting which almost killed him. No one in his family would take him in, and that's when he appeared back at Kiki's house, looking for somewhere to stay. His family added he had a history of mental health issues, and detectives said there was also evidence to suggest that there may have been conflict in the house very recently over his efforts to convert the family to Islam. 7-year-old Ronnie told the deputies from his hospital bed that his parents were talking about God and religion just before the incident. As he awaited his court appearances, his 7-year-old son Ronnie was undergoing painful and intensive treatment in hospital, and he was making a really good recovery. There was one face that was irregular at his bedside, Detective Mike Blair. Although Blair was only supposed to be involved in the case on a very limited basis, he couldn't stop thinking about Ronnie in hospital, what his family had gone through, and what his life now looked like. Another detective mentioned that Ronnie was a big football fan, so Blair reached out to some contacts he had with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, hoping that the team might be able to donate a jersey to Ronnie. The team was happy to help, and the executives even offered to go and visit him in hospital. Blair was the last to leave the room that day, and as he was leaving, Ronnie grabbed his hand and said, "Could you watch a movie with me?" He had to finish his shift, but told him he would be back. He called his wife Danielle, and they both came back over and watched Power Rangers together. A guardian was put in place to supervise Ronnie as he was set up with a foster family. He continued to come back in for various checkups and appointments, and Blair would always make sure to pop his head in and say hi. But on one visit, the detective knew it was time to say goodbye for good and told his guardian, "Well, if he ever needs anything, give me a call." And sure enough, that call came. Ronnie was having such a tough time with where he was living. His guardian called him and asked him what he should do. "Bring him to me," Mike said. And with just the shirt on his back, 7-year-old Ronnie arrived at the Blairs' house. O'Neill was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder, arson, and aggravated child abuse. He pleaded not guilty to all the charges, and the state announced that they would be seeking the death penalty. Before any such trial could commence, O'Neill was in and out of observations with several doctors and experts addressing his mental state. After much analysis and opinion, in October 2018, O'Neill was found not competent to stand trial, much to the dismay of Kiki's family and friends, and 2 months later the courts terminated his parental rights when it came to Ronnie and another child he had with another woman. Back at the Blairs' house, they knew that fostering meant at some point Ronnie would leave them as he transitioned into another home and family. Ronnie had arrived at the house so sad and confused and spent every day repeatedly asking the same questions. Am I going to have to move again? How long am I going to stay? How long am I going to be here? Mike and Danielle quickly realized that they weren't going to be able to say goodbye, and a big decision was made. Ronnie wasn't going anywhere. He was a part of this family now. In June 2019, after further assessments, a judge determined that he was competent to stand trial and it would go ahead, which in June 2021 it did. This 3 years in the making court case would garner national attention as O'Neill decided to represent himself in court, acting as his own attorney, something which, for obvious reasons, everybody advised him against, including the judge. She said, "You know, you have the right to represent yourself. You also have the right to have counsel represent you. Again, I'm going to tell you that there are many potential disadvantages and pitfalls to representing yourself, specifically that you will be held to the same standard that the lawyers would be." But O'Neill demanded that he be allowed to act as his own attorney, saying that the public defenders assigned to his case refused to use the stand your ground defense for the trial, a defense in which Florida states that a person has no duty to retreat and can use deadly force when in fear of great bodily harm or death. But this did not apply in any way to this case. So when he heard this, he decided to drop his lawyers and represent himself. He often screamed at the jurors, was agitated and unpredictable, and his big defense was that the case had been fabricated by the police. The 911 calls Kiki had made were fake, and law enforcement had tampered with evidence and coached his now 11-year-old son Ronnie to say things. And then came a truly unprecedented moment as far as court cases would go. 11-year-old Ronnie would testify against his father, and his father would cross-examine him. Detective Blair also went on the stand and told the jury about how he and his wife now had Ronnie living with them, and when it came time for O'Neill to talk to him, he took a long pause and everyone held their breath, wondering what he was going to say about this. He said, "Thank you. From the bottom of my heart to the top of my head. Thank you for what you've done. No further questions, Your Honor." Blair left the courtroom. The way O'Neill behaved throughout this entire trial put everyone on edge. Experienced trial lawyer Anthony Rickman was not involved in the case but had, along with most people, been following it. He said, "You have the person who is accused of 2 heinous murders, screaming at the jury. When you look at how he presented himself throughout the case, pacing the courtroom, his body language, his gestures, his rage, his anger, the mood swings, he painted a picture of what he probably looked like when he committed these murders." It was now time for the closing arguments. After a 2-week trial, all was said and done, and it was down to the jury. They talked for just a few hours, and their verdict came as no surprise. He was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated child abuse, 1 count of resisting law enforcement, and arson. During the penalty phase of the process, deciding whether he would actually be sentenced to death or not, he changed his tune and chose to let the lawyers take this part. His defense team argued that he had schizophrenia and delusional disorder and was shot just months before the murders, raped as a child and suffers from PTSD. They said it was an idle mind in a devil's workshop, adding, "Capital felony was committed while the defendant was under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance." O'Neill escaped the death penalty, as in Florida it must be a unanimous decision. Instead, he was sentenced to life without parole plus 60 years. Carrie, Kiki's mom, spoke to him in court, calling him a coward and saying that the wrong decision was made by the jury. The prosecution agreed and said that they felt they presented a case that was indeed fit to be punished by death. Kiki's sister DeSato was devastated at the result as well. Ronnie O'Neill III addressed the court for one final time, and Judge Michelle Cisco told him if he raised his voice again like that, she would just ask him to leave. She gave her final thoughts in a powerful speech, sometimes fighting back tears and sometimes struggling to even find the words, all while trying to remain as professional as possible. But this case had left her sick. O'Neill later appealed for a new trial, but this was denied and his conviction was upheld. The staggeringly cruel events of that night back in March 2018 are frankly hard to think about. Carrie said Kiki and Nivi were the light of so many lives, lights that were dimmed far too early and in the most barbaric way. She said, "Family and my life. I breathe for my family and now you've got me gasping for air." Their lives came to an unbelievably terrifying end, and Ronnie has been left with a trauma that is just not able to be understood. That being said, it is here that we end today's episode with a silver lining amidst such a stormy sky. Ronnie O'Neill is now officially Ronnie Blair, and he is doing amazingly well in his new home with Mike and Danielle. His new older brother Hunter said he quickly became like any younger brother. He's an extremely strong, funny kid. It's hard to picture our family without him. Ronnie said, "They are the best mom and dad and they really take care of me. There is no one else better than them. It means a lot to me to have a family that can always help me get through the things I need to get through. I feel loved. They got me through the trial and they were always there by my side if I cried or needed help. I could share my feelings with them, and I felt like I could explain everything to them and it would get better. Ronnie loves performing in films and hopes one day to become an actor. He loves playing with the family dog, swimming and traveling with everyone, as well as the Blairs to help him. He is finding his feet again with regular therapy sessions. Whatever lies ahead for Ronnie, we want him to go after it and do it, said Detective Mike Blair. They all know that nothing can ever replace what Ronnie lost. Mike said, Daniela and I told him we don't ever expect to replace his mom and dad. Ronnie does have fond memories and remembers times before that night that were very positive. They always make sure his mother Kiki and sister Nevi are spoken about all the time and are regular names in their house. And every time Ronnie has moments of stress, anxiety, or anger, they have a family mantra. Something Mike says to him every night before bed. Hey, remember, what are you? And although the now teenage Ronnie will sometimes smile and roll his eyes, his answer is always the same. I am safe, I am loved, and I am part of this family. Friday, November 25th, 2022, Thanksgiving weekend, 6:58 a.m. Riverside, California, a small cul-de-sac in Price Court. It was a quiet morning that Friday. Most families were still asleep, having enjoyed great food and company the previous evening. Thanksgiving. The weekend for most would be more of the same, eating well, relaxing, and spending time together. Just before 7 a.m., a red Kia Soul parks up in the area, and a man wearing a tan-colored trench coat, a black fedora and face mask, carrying a black duffel bag and a plastic bag, gets out. He walks around the area for a while, standing outside a house for a moment, before going back to the car and driving off. He does the same thing twice. One of the neighbors thought it looked so weird. She called the Riverside Police's non-emergency line to report the license plate. But whoever it was hadn't actually done anything, so all they could do was make a note of it. 2 hours later, 9 a.m., Michelle Blandon was just on her way out of the house when she got a call from her mother, Sherry. Sherry was panicked and talking fast. She said that a detective was in the house and wanting to talk to her 15-year-old granddaughter, Michelle's niece. He said something had happened near the school and it was very urgent that he get hold of her. 65-year-old Sherry lived in the home with her husband, 69-year-old Mark, a volunteer high school softball and baseball coach, her daughter, 38-year-old Brooke, and Brooke's 2 young girls. Everyone's minds were racing. Had the teen done something wrong? Was she in trouble? Was he going to take her to the station? Sherry said it was just her and Mark in the house as Brooke had taken her girls out. The officer said he would have to wait until they came home and interview everyone separately. It seemed really serious. Michelle was baffled and worried but reassured her mother it was probably nothing and to try and stay calm. Sherry asked the detective if it was okay for Brooke's other daughter to get dropped off at Michelle's house while they sorted everything out, and he agreed. All everyone could do was wait until the teen came home with Brooke. The detective told Sherry that he needed to talk to the adults first, and the teen would have to wait in the car once she got there, along with both hers and Brooke's phones. Michelle's heart started to beat fast, and the anxious feeling she had was growing. None of this felt right or normal, not even close. Michelle knew her mom wouldn't have opened the door for anyone, let alone let someone in. He was an officer, he had a badge and the authority to go in, and everything would be fine. A few minutes later, Brooke arrived at her house to drop off her niece, and Michelle watched as Brooke and her 15-year-old daughter drove off to Price Court. Michelle called Sherry back and said they were on their way over, and asked if everything was okay. Sherry's voice was shaky and she was fighting back tears. She said the detective was still in the house, but before she could say anything else, he took the phone off her. Calming and reassuring, he said, "I'm here with your mom. She is kind of being anxious and freaking out. Everything is going to be okay. It's all okay." He passed the phone back over and Michelle strained to hear what was being said. She heard the detective say, as part of the investigation, that he needed to search the teen's room. The room with the Green Bay Packers memorabilia, he said. Michelle felt sick. How on earth did he know what the inside of her family's house looked like? But before she could say anything to her mother, Sherry said, "I'll call you back," and the line went dead. There was nothing Michelle could do but wait, so she tried to shake it off and headed out into town. Brooke finally pulled up and went inside, her daughter staying in the car as per the officer's instructions. A short while later, Michelle sent a text to her mom asking for an update. She got no reply. 11:08 a.m. 911 dispatchers received a call requesting that a welfare check be carried out at Price Court. A couple of residents were concerned as they had watched a man leaving a house with a much younger girl who was very distressed. She had no shoes on and was subtly trying to mouth words at people watching. Although they couldn't tell what she was trying to communicate, the pair walked towards a red Kia Soul which was parked on someone's drive. The same person's drive, in fact, that had reported the car's license plates just a few hours earlier. As the pair approached the car, the owner of the house opened the door and shouted at the man that he couldn't park there. The man was very apologetic and said he was leaving. He opened the back passenger side door and the girl got inside. He then walked around to the back door on the driver's side and put the black duffel bag inside. As he turned around, the neighbor saw some red spots on his clothes, which looked like blood, but she couldn't be sure. Although the girl wasn't physically forced into the car, something was very troubling about the situation. Before the man shut the doors, the girl quietly whispered, "Help me," and the car sped away. Michelle, who was still out in town, then got a Facebook message from a neighbor of her parents. "Please call me ASAP," it read. A few minutes later, more calls came flooding into the Riverside Police Department. A house was on fire at Price Court. It was Mark and Sherry's. Michelle jumped in the car with her husband and they started heading across town. She was calling her mom, dad, and sister repeatedly, but no one was picking up. Price Court, authorities were now there and tackling the blaze. The windows were starting to smash because of the heat and the roof was caving in. As firefighters made it inside, they found the bodies of Mark, Sherry, and Brooke lying closely together near the front door. They all had plastic bags over their heads and were bound and gagged. They were already dead and their neighbors watched in horror as they were pulled from the home. Michelle and her husband pulled up to her parents' house just after this and Michelle tried to run through the tape as the police dragged her back. Her parents' and sister's cars were still parked outside, and although it was too early to tell who had been inside, soon heard that several bodies had already been carried out. As a shaken Michelle headed to the station with the police, other officers were trying to track down the red Kia. Michelle told them about the strange phone calls that morning and the detective inside her parents' house. She said there was no way the man would have got inside the house without showing some form of ID. Sherry would never have let him in without this, no matter what he said. Police were still not confirming anything. But when Michelle told them about her father's 2 tattoos on each arm, a Green Bay Packers logo on his left and a Notre Dame mascot on his right, she was faced with a situation that she had somehow been trying to rationalize and come up with excuses for. Her mother, father, and sister were inside the house and her niece was now missing. Despite people wondering if the fire had caused their deaths, an autopsy would later reveal that Mark, Sherry, and Brooke had all likely died of asphyxiation. They had been bound and gagged before plastic bags were put over their heads and Brooke's throat had been slashed. Mark was killed first and they could see from the injuries that Brooke had really tried hard to fight off the attacker. 3 of the family's dogs would also die in the fire, along with their pet bird. Their 4th dog, which had been in the backyard at the time, survived and went into a shelter whilst a new home was found. For the small, quiet community and everyone that knew the family, it was impossible to believe that anything like this could happen on their doorsteps. Around the same time all of this was going on, over 2,000 miles away in Virginia, a woman was filing a missing persons report. Her boyfriend of 5 years had taken off and now she couldn't get hold of him. The couple had been celebrating Thanksgiving together in San Diego for a few days with her parents when he suddenly started packing to leave. He said he had run out of vacation time and needed to drive back to Virginia where he had just purchased a house. But the drive would take over a day and this hadn't been their plan. Little did she know he hadn't set off to Virginia. He had set off for Riverside, California, and she would soon realize it was her boyfriend that was now on the run with the missing 15-year-old girl. Using the license plate the neighborhood had previously given them, police in Riverside were finally able to track down the red Kia as it was heading into Kelso, an unincorporated area of San Bernardino County, on a totally empty and rural road far away from anything. They caught up to the car and a SWAT team and helicopter were in pursuit. The man finally pulled over and jumped out of the car, firing his gun. He showed no signs of backing down. A shootout ensued with the man as the girl ran from the car. In a matter of seconds, the driver was dead and the teen was with the police. Most reports state that he had turned the gun on himself, but some say he was killed by police fire. The 15-year-old, who to this day has never been named, was alive and unharmed. She was taken into protective custody before they began interviewing her. She and her sister also began a lengthy process of trauma counseling and a GoFundMe raised over $100,000, which would be given to the girls. Upon hearing that she had been found alive, Michelle commended the neighbor for being so diligent in reporting the number plate and for persisting they look into it. She believes it absolutely saved her niece's life. The man who had kidnapped her and killed her family was 28-year-old Austin Lee Edwards, a serving Virginia State Deputy Sheriff. To the authorities' surprise, the teen said she did actually know Austin, having met him online, but he was not the person she thought he was. The pair had started speaking on Omegle, a free online chat site that allows people to socialize with others without the need to register or create an account. The site randomly pairs users in one-on-one chat sessions where they talk anonymously using the names you and stranger. She had been honest about her age, but Austin had told her that he was 17. It is unknown what, if any, pictures he was using or who he was pretending to be. The police couldn't determine how long they had actually been talking for or how he had got hold of her address. But at some point Austin had asked her for photographs that were sexual in nature. She said after this she stopped talking to him. Detectives theorized that maybe he killed her family in retaliation, or he thought that if he kidnapped her he could stop her from talking to anyone. They also couldn't rule out the possibility that he did have some explicit photos of her. And maybe this was an attempt at sextortion. His messages showed he was clearly obsessed and was going to stop at nothing. But with more than 1 million pages of social media content to go through, it was safe to say the full story would take some time to come to light. The teen told police that morning that she had no idea what was going on as she and Brooke pulled up to the house. She said she had waited in the car following Brooke's instructions, but it ended up getting too hot. She took her shoes off and stood outside for some air before tentatively walking inside the house to see what was going on. As soon as she went through the door, the first thing she saw was her grandmother Sherry with a bag over her head and her hands tied. She was still moving slightly. Before she had time to process anything, Austin appeared and pointed a gun at her and ordered that she leave with him. It is unknown where he was driving her or what, if any, conversations took place in his car. And Austin was now dead and couldn't answer for himself. So who was he and what did they know about him? 28-year-old Austin Edwards had joined the police academy in July 2021, and after graduating a year later, he went to Henrico County within the Richmond Division of Virginia. He resigned from the department after a couple of months, but no reason could be given for him leaving as it was not in his personnel file. A month after leaving, Austin was still associated with the Washington County Sheriff's Office and stepped into the Patrol Division as a Virginia State Deputy Sheriff. Little under 2 weeks before he drove to California, in a small town of less than 2,000 people, Austin had purchased a new home. Neighbors said he was friendly and they felt safe around him, knowing he was a police officer, feeling a certain level of protection from him. Austin spent a lot of time blacking out all the windows in his home, but less than 10 days after moving in, Austin Lee Edwards, the Winnicks and their pets would all be dead in another state. As the investigation was unraveling, over in Washington one woman was scrolling aimlessly on Instagram when she landed on a picture that made her freeze. It was a photo of Austin. Not only was the story his face was attached to horrific, she had her own story from years ago. She had met Austin on Omega 2. He was 20, she just 13. And he had groomed, stalked, and harassed her for years. She almost threw up when she saw him. I read the whole story and it made me feel disgusting, she said. Seeing everything that had happened to the Winnick family over in California, the now 21-year-old took her story to the police and was able to offer up almost 4,000 messages between the pair from years ago. Austin had started off sweet and chatty, and she told him right away that she was 13. But this did not deter him from talking to her. He soon started asking for nude photographs and told her he loved her. He often spoke about hurting himself as a way of release. On one occasion, he insisted she join him on Skype. I can't yet, she told him. Why's that? He replied. Because my mom, she said. Kill her. I'ma give myself a black eye. Okay? He replied. Listen, there's no obstacle that's gonna stop us from being together if that's what we both want. It doesn't even matter if you're 14 and not technically allowed to do shit yet, he said. She eventually cut ties with him, but this didn't stop him trying to get hold of her. Another thing that the messages brought to light was something serious that had happened in 2016. 2 weeks after the teen had told him she didn't want to talk to him, Austin had been detained for psychiatric evaluation after threatening to take his own life and kill his father. Police had been called to the home by Austin's dad, Christopher. They found him trying to restrain Austin on the kitchen floor, which was covered in blood, and Christopher had bite marks all over his arms. Police pulled out a taser, but Christopher said he could handle it, still trying to protect his son. Eventually, Austin was handcuffed, strapped to a stretcher, and checked into a hospital. He said he had had an argument with his girlfriend and was lashing out, his girlfriend being the 14-year-old who was trying to get away from him. Despite blocking him on every account, He made new ones and always found a way to reach her. The harassment went on for years until she was 18, when it all abruptly stopped. It is unknown whether this coincided with meeting the 15-year-old online, but investigations show the timings match up for this to be a possibility. Upon sending him to a mental health hospital in 2016, the judge said there was a substantial likelihood as a result of mental illness, he will, in the near future, seriously harm himself or suffer harm. The incident also prompted the judge to strip him of his gun rights. Under Virginia law, anyone who was held on a temporary detention order and later admitted to a treatment facility is not allowed to buy or possess a firearm until that right has been restored by the courts. His gun rights were never restored. On his application to the academy, Austin disclosed that he had voluntarily checked himself into a mental health facility, which meant he had to undergo a mental health evaluation and exam. He failed. Austin used his father, a close friend, and his Virginia State Police field training officer as references for the academy, and despite the failed evaluations and the fact the court had taken his gun rights away, he was still accepted. The Virginia State Police deliberately buried the results of this mental health examination, did no further examination into this aspect of Edwards' application, and hired him, Notice said. The interim police chief for the Aurora, Colorado Police Department and a nationally recognized policing expert said, "I'd have to ask a lot of questions about why he's moving so quickly. That's pretty unusual for someone to go through academy and all of a sudden turn around and leave." He said most departments would be unlikely to hire Austin after such a brief work history unless he enrolled in their own police academy. With all of this coming to light, Michelle and her family wanted answers, but they weren't getting any. The Washington County Sheriff said, but the Virginia State Police said he didn't ever display any red flags. He was the nicest person and loved helping people in his job. They said he had no reprimands, no complaints, no instances of use of force levied, no internal investigations, and no disciplinary investigations. Michelle said that not one department ever apologized or even acknowledged them for a period of time. Eventually, Virginia State Police would issue a statement and say it was an isolated incident, adding, he wouldn't have been hired. Riverside Police Chief Larry Gonzalez said, "It's disturbing. It's disgusting. Anybody in the law enforcement community, we hate that person more than anybody because it's a reflection on us. This is yet another horrific reminder of the predators existing online who prey on our children. If you've already had a conversation with your kids on how to be safe online and on social media, have it again. If not, start now to better protect them." After all of these failings were highlighted, Governor Glenn Youngkin requested a full investigation be carried out by the state's watchdog agency. An agreement with the watchdog agency later allowed Virginia State Police to investigate themselves. Michelle and her family filed a notice of intent to sue in relation to the hiring process of Austin and the failures that had ensued. She said, "Want to know why this person was able to get hired by not one, but two agencies and given a firearm when he couldn't legally buy one?" Her attorney said Austin's employers demonstrated negligence, gross negligence, negligent and gross negligent hiring, breach of mandatory duties, and other violations of Virginia state law. They argued that the family's damages exceeded $100 million. Even though Austin is now dead and cannot give anyone any information, police say they are continuing to look into his past, his laptop and his phones to determine if he has any more victims and piece together more of his story. But with so many pages of messages from only 2 people so far, police say they could be unraveling things for years and might never know the full truth. Mark, Sherry, and Brooke, along with their beloved pets, died in the most frightening of ways, terrified and trying to protect each other. Michelle said they all lived and loved selflessly. Mark was dearly loved by the kids he coached, and he left a big impact on many, with some saying he shaped their futures and what they wanted to do when they were older. He would always make sure he checked on them from time to time to see if everything was going well for them in college. The school paid tribute to him as well. His neighbor said he was someone that never stopped and loved being busy. He would offer to mow people's lawns to help them out and to pass the time. Sherry loved nothing more than being with her family. Celebrations like Thanksgiving and Christmas were her favorite times of year, when everyone could just be together and she would bake cakes and cookies for her children and grandchildren. "We had a family debate and it got heated on if the brownies my mom made should be frosted with sprinkles or just left plain," Michelle said. "Little did I know on that day would be the last time my husband and I would see my parents and sister again." Brooke was a single parent, and Michelle said her biggest joys in life were watching her 2 girls grow and collecting Starbucks cups. Michelle laughed. Brooke was telling everyone that her daughter had joined the color guard at school, and nothing made her prouder than watching her. For the girls and Michelle who were left behind, It is impossible to imagine how they must find each day. Celebrations such as birthdays, Christmas and Thanksgiving will never be the same, and what should be such a happy time to be with each other will always serve as a painful reminder of what was taken from them. In a touching tribute, Price Court in Riverside was ceremoniously renamed Winnick Court and is placed next to the Winnick's home. Mark's nephew and godson said, "Mark and Sherry's pride and joy were their kids and by extension their grandchildren. You never saw them beam so brightly than when they were around their family." When the skeletal remains of 22 years old, Caitlin Markham were found 2 years after she went missing in a wooded area in rural Cedar Grove, Indiana, 30 miles away from her Fairfield home. Authorities who were initially racking their brains on what could have happened to her, then began to ask questions on who killed Caitlin Markham. Over the years, detectives did all they could to solve the mystery behind her murder, following every lead. Finally, after 12 years, the Caitlin Markham's cold case has been solved and her killer arrested. Caitlin Helene Markham was born on the 16th of August 1990 in Hamilton County, Ohio. Growing up, Caitlin Markham would always light up a room with her bubbly personality. Her family members described her as a light who was warm and showed compassion to others. In a documentary about her death, her younger sister, Allie, said, "Caitlin always took care of me. Her bubbly and spirit-free nature made family and friends compare her to a butterfly. She grew up loving everything arts." Caitlin pretty much had her life planned out before college. At 22 years old, she was wrapping up her undergraduate studies from the Art Institute of Cincinnati in Ohio, and she was already engaged to be married. Caitlin, who was saving up money to move to Colorado with her fiancé immediately after marriage, had 2 jobs. She worked at her campus bookstore and at David's Bridal. Sadly, her bright future would not come to stay as horror struck 2 days to her 22nd birthday. Around 9 p.m. at night, on the 13th of August 2011, Caitlin Markham arrived home to her apartment in Fairfield after her work shift was over at the bridal shop. On getting home, she was met with her fiancé, John Carter, who was already there waiting for her return. Later that evening, a friend of Caitlin also came over to hang out with the couple, but she ended up leaving after she sensed the tension between Caitlin and John. The friend noticed that Caitlin seemed quiet. She asked John why the couple were acting weird, and John said it was due to magic mushrooms that he and Caitlin had taken. Later that evening, according to John Carter, he left Caitlin's condo to meet up with some friends for a bonfire at 11 p.m. Caitlin Markham, who stayed back home, was said to have been reportedly annoyed with John Carter for leaving. By the following day, Caitlin Markham had mysteriously vanished overnight from her apartment with no trace. Around 8 p.m., John Carter, who visited her to check if she was okay since she wasn't picking up his calls or replying his messages, called 911 and told the operator that his fiancée had gone missing. John Carter was heard saying, "My fiancée is missing. I can't find her anywhere. I saw her at like 12 o'clock last night. She stays in a house by herself, so I'm really nervous. Her car is still there. I had been trying to get a hold of her and I decided to go by her house and see if she was okay and her car was still there. She would be at work right now with her car, which is why I'm like really freaking out." Officers from the Fairfield police then began an investigation into the case, searching for leads in Caitlin Markham's disappearance. Days after her disappearance, family, friends, and people who care came out in their hundreds, volunteering to search for Caitlin Markham around her home, her neighborhoods in Fairfield, the Art Institute, and the Tri-County Mall where she worked. But hours turned into days, days into months, and months into years. There was no sign of Caitlin Markham anywhere. Cell phone records showed she sent a final text that Carter reported in the early hours of August 14, 2011, at 12:52 a.m. Since that moment in time, investigators found no signs of cell phone or credit card activity. The first set of suspects were her family and friends. Since John Carter was the last person to see her alive, the investigators questioned him about the night he saw her last. John told the detectives that the last time he heard from Caitlin was when he was at the bonfire night. He said, few minutes before 1 a.m. Caitlin had texted him a photo she liked that her boss had taken. When asked where he went after the bonfire, he told detectives that around 4 a.m. he went to his home, which he shared with his mother and fell asleep. The next day, he said he sent Caitlin Markham a good morning text, but he never got a reply. By afternoon, Carter said unlike Caitlin, she still hadn't returned his text. By the end of the day, John claimed to have not heard from her, so he became worried and decided to go to her apartment to check on his fiancée. He said on getting to her house, her car was in the driveway, her dog was inside, but Caitlin was nowhere to be found. He was asked if he and Caitlin had been having issues in their relationship, to which he replied, "Not at all." However, Caitlin's friend, Michelle Feist, made a contrast to this. In fact, Michelle had told the media that Caitlin and John had a pretty heated argument just 2 days before her disappearance. According to Michelle, on August 12, 2011, John and Caitlin allegedly got into an argument about money issues. Despite their differences, the couple went to a festival at a nearby church that evening. According to Michelle, John and Caitlin's dispute spilled over onto the occasion. Caitlin eventually became upset and decided to leave the festival early. It's also conceivable that John and Caitlin made up before she disappeared. But as was already said, the couple appeared to be having some tension the next night as well. At Caitlin's condo, a friend chose to leave after getting the impression that the couple preferred to be by themselves. Many people at the time, including Caitlin's family, believed that John Carter had something to do with her disappearance. They disputed John Carter's claim that Caitlin's moody and unusual, quiet behavior on the night her friend came to visit was because he and Caitlin had consumed magic mushrooms. They reasoned that since the friend came over around 15 minutes after Caitlin got home from work, it is not possible that she would start experiencing the effects of the mushrooms that rapidly, even if she had taken them as soon as she entered her condo. Some people, however, have questioned whether Caitlin even consumed the mushrooms in the first place. It seemed odd that she would want to experience the effects of mushrooms if she merely wanted to relax at home after a long day of work. She had just arrived home and was exhausted. The bonfire was another peculiar element of John's story that several people thought was weird. On August 13th, at around 11 p.m., John claimed to have left Caitlin's condo to meet up with friends. He brought along a bag filled with Caitlin's documents, which he intended to burn at the bonfire. John clarified that Caitlin wanted to shred the papers rather than discard them, but she did not have a shredder. He then took the documents instead, intending to destroy them so she wouldn't have to worry about it. Although some people think this is an unusual justification for why he destroyed Caitlin's documents. First, it didn't seem like too much of a stretch. It's possible that he really was doing Caitlin a favor by removing the papers from her house, because he admitted to the investigators that he frequently ran errands for her. However, some have generally questioned John's alibi. A handful of the friends John claimed to have been with that evening have provided contradictory accounts. Some others even assert that there wasn't even a bonfire that night, even though there was a lot of speculation regarding John. It seems that gradually, the focus of the investigation shifted. John Carter had frequently addressed Caitlin's issue in the media over the years, and he has maintained his denial of any participation in her disappearance. On the 16th of August 2011, 3 days after Caitlin's disappearance, John Carter mentioned being scared and concerned during one of the searches for his fiancée. In his words, he said, "I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified. I just want to find Caitlin and celebrate her birthday with her and go to Red Lobster like she was planning." He later stated that Caitlin was strong and would fight her way out if she is somewhere, and is in a worst-case scenario. However, the search for Caitlin came to an end when, after many days, she wouldn't be found. The case went cold for nearly 2 years until on April 7, 2013, when a couple who was reportedly looking for scrap metal came across what appeared to be a grocery bag containing a human jaw and a skull with hair still attached to it. The couple would immediately call 911. In order to identify the remains of the victim, a Franklin County, Indiana coroner, Wanda Lee, used dental records which ultimately confirmed that the remains were Caitlin Markham's. Her death was then ruled a homicide, but her cause of death could not be determined. When the news of her death got to her family, they were unavoidably devastated to find out that she had been a victim of a homicide. They were also not overly shocked by the information. Her family held on to hope that she would be found safe when she first went missing. Their hopes faded as weeks turned into months without any trace of her. They eventually came to the conclusion that Caitlin had been murdered. On April 18, 2013, Caitlin Markham's family and friends gathered for a celebration of life at Harbin Park, one of her favorite places. For months later, on the 25th of August 2013, her funeral was held at her alma mater, Fairfield High School. The room was decorated with many bright colors, just the way she would have loved it. Her fiancé, John Carter, was in tears as he spoke in front of the crowd and called Caitlin the love of his life. "We would have had our kiss. We would have had our marriage. We would have had our honeymoon. We would have had our kid. We would have had our life and we would have grown old together," said John Carter. Since Caitlin Markham's remains were found in Indiana, the Indiana State Police joined in the investigation. In the years following the discovery of her remains, Caitlin Markham's family hired a private investigator to look into the case as well. Though the Fairfield Police and Indiana State Police had opened an investigation on the case, Caitlin's family reportedly felt enough resources were not being dedicated to her death. The Caitlin Markham's case grew to garner national attention over the years. In the year 2016, a documentary was made in her honor to celebrate her life. Her family and friends were featured in the one-hour documentary, which was titled, Taken Too Soon, The Caitlin Markham Story. The documentary also got featured on a syndicated TV show named Crime Watch Daily. On Caitlin Markham's 27th birthday, her family and friends gathered at a Springdale, Ohio movie theater to watch the premiere of the documentary. Her family kept hope alive, believing that the documentary would bring answers to their daughter's murder case. Over the years, many rumors and theories, some fueled by social media, have surfaced as to what happened to Caitlin Markham. One theory stated that she died of a drug overdose, and those with her panicked taking her body to Indiana and dumping it on a rural road in Franklin County. Other theories point to family and friends being responsible for her death, including her fiancé, John Carter. After a lot of investigation, Sheriff's detective announced that there was a suspect in the case, but a name was not mentioned. However, the arrest of Michael Strauss and his past life prompted speculation about the unsolved homicide of Caitlin Markham at the time. Police say Michael Strauss is responsible for the death of 23-year-old Ellen Week at his Liberty Township home. Michael Strauss was charged with murder after a body believed to be Ellen Week was found in a field on Milliken Road. Ellen Week was also said to have disappeared from her home like Caitlin did. Michael Strauss was considered a suspect in Caitlin Markham's case at the time because there were photos posted online, which featured Michael Strauss, Caitlin Markham, and other friends. These photos suggested that Michael Strauss was an acquaintance of Caitlin Markham. As the investigation progresses, Michael Strauss was never pinned as Caitlin Markham's killer, having exhausted all leads. The reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of Caitlin Markham's killer grew to $100,000 over the years. But despite the investigation on the case by multiple law enforcement agencies, her case remained unsolved for over a decade. However, there appeared to be a break on the 17th of February 2023, when detectives arrested Jonathan Pomerton, a close friend to Caitlin Markham and a childhood friend to John Carter. Jonathan was arrested at his workplace, and prosecutors say he had lied in an interview in April 2022, during the investigation of Caitlin Markham's cold case. After a search warrant was filed for his home, investigators retrieved some incriminating evidence that suggested he lied in connection to Caitlin's murder. He was later charged with felony and perjury, and his bond was set at $50,000. Markham's father said Pomerton's arrest makes him hopeful, but he remains guarded as the case progresses. A month after Jonathan Pomerton was arrested for perjury, John Carter, Caitlin Markham's fiancé, was apprehended at his workplace as a suspect to her death. Investigators revealed discovering incriminating evidence at his home in Fairfield during a search. These evidence suggested John Carter as the suspect they have been looking for. John Carter appeared in court and pled not guilty. However, Butler County Prosecutor Mike G. Moser revealed new details in court about the discovery of Caitlin's body. He said there were a set of 3 or 4 sharp force wounds to Caitlin's left wrist. According to forensic report, the place where Caitlin Markham's body was ultimately found is probably not where the body was first deposited. During the argument for a high bond, G.M. Moser read writings that he said detectives found inside John Carter's mother's home during a recent search warrant. John Carter had lived in his mother's home at the time of Caitlin's death. One of the writings says, "Deep down, I love her. You want to kill her. But I love her. She must die. You can't kill her." Yes, you can. No, yes, how do you talk me into all these things? I'm just that good. But you're bad. I know. How do I kill you? You can't. You're right. About what? Nothing. It was as if John Carter was fighting and conversing with a demon. Other documents revealed in court stated that John Carter suffers from PTSD and depression. John Carter was placed on a $1 million bond, but posted bail on the 4th of April, 2023. He stood in court wearing only an ankle monitor after his $1 million cash bond. He was allowed to face the judge unshackled. His trial date is set for June 2024, and he will remain out of jail during that time. After John Carter was arrested, Caitlin's dad, Dave Markham, said, "Dave thinks John Carter's arrest could mean he and Allie may finally have justice for their daughter and sister's murder." Emily Longley was born in England in 1994 to Mark and Caroline Longley. 2 years later, her parents had another child, Emily's younger sister, Hannah. From early childhood, the girls were very close to each other. They lived in a loving and caring family. When Emily was 9 and Hannah was 7, the family moved to New Zealand. Auckland became their new home. When Emily fell in with the wrong crowd after emigrating to New Zealand, her middle-class parents sent her back to the UK to start a new life with her grandparents. In 2010, Emily flew to England to study at Brockenhurst College. She wanted to get a business degree and dreamed of becoming a model. In England, she lived at her grandparents' house in Bournemouth. Bournemouth, adjacent to Poole in the west, is a town in the county of Dorset, a popular resort on the English Channel coast. When Emily moved to England, her sister Hannah was still at school, and her parents, Mark and Caroline, divorced but maintained a friendly relationship. Emily was a beautiful young woman who attracted much attention. One day, she met 20-year-old Elliot Turner. He made quite an impression on her. Gradually, their communication grew into a romantic relationship. In April 2011, Emily returned to New Zealand to visit her family, whom she had not seen for about 6 months. Her father met her at the airport. She ran up to him and hugged him tightly, saying she missed him very much. Emily had a very close relationship with her father, who loved her madly and missed her smile, laughter, and dirty jokes. The following day, the whole family went to Emily's favorite pizzeria. She told her parents that, apart from studying in college, she was engaged in modeling and made some incredible friends. She also mentioned the man she was dating, 20-year-old Elliot Turner. They had only been dating for a few months, and it seemed to her that she was too young for something serious. "I think I'm going to end it when I go back," she said. Emily spent the next few weeks hanging out with friends and family. She had a wonderful time. No one suspected they would soon lose her. When Emily's flight started boarding, it was hard for her to say goodbye to her family. However, Emily promised she would be back in 5 months. She wanted to see the matches of the Rugby World Cup, which was to begin on September 9th. While texting with her father a few days later, Emily informed him about breaking up with Elliot. But she did not go into details. Elliot behaved strangely after seeing the photos of Emily that she posted on social networks while in New Zealand. There were guys in these photos, and Elliot was very jealous. The son of a wealthy jeweler, Elliot Turner, was 20 years old, and his life seemed carefree. Turner was well known in the local bar and club scene in the Bournemouth and Poole areas, and was part of a gang of wealthy young men called the Firm. Called by his friends All Talk Turner because of his boasting, he met Emily in December 2010. The couple enjoyed the high life at the resort and often had fun until late at night. But Turner, who had a history of obsession with women, soon showed signs of jealousy. As a result, their relationship quickly escalated into violent arguments. Some people described him as a person displaying a threatening, aggressive, violent, controlling, and possessive nature. In January 2008, when he was 16, he received a harassment warning letter from the police telling him not to contact his ex-girlfriend after he bombarded her with text messages and emails because she broke up with him. Turner loved being at the center of attention. He didn't need to work for a living. His parents gave him everything he needed. He skillfully manipulated people, including his parents. His life was all about parties, women, alcohol, and illegal substances. He considered himself a man who can do anything he wants. Elliot carried a hammer with him in case anyone tried to contradict him. His friends believed that Turner fancied himself a gangster and wanted to become the one everyone turned to for help. He could come to the bar and buy everyone a drink. Elliot bragged about driving a new Mini Cooper, but it was a gift from his grandmother. He tried to maintain his bad boy image with a series of supposedly streetwise messages on social networking sites, where he often referred to himself as Scarface or God. He didn't lack female attention, but when he met Emily, he became very attached to her. She complimented his image of a successful person, which he worked hard to create. As their relationship developed, Turner started showing his controlling behavior more and more often. He even threatened Emily that he would take her life. In an emotional plea to Turner, Emily wrote a note to him a few months before her death saying, 1. I love you. 2. Don't say you'll kill me. 3. Stop talking about your ex-girlfriends. 4. Stop being so constantly aggressive. Be more cool, because that is so much more hot and you make me scared because you're so intimidating. When Turner began to show his true face and when his controlling behavior started to go beyond all reasonable limits, Emily realized that he was not the person she wanted to be with. However, people like Turner don't understand rejection. On the evening of May 6, 2011, Emily was with friends in one of the entertainment venues. Surveillance cameras captured how she came to a nightclub with her friends. That evening, Turner read her Facebook messages and discovered that Emily was dating another man. Pissed him off. He came to the club and started arguing with Emily. This whole story ended with the girl throwing her drink in his face. Turner verbally abused her and threatened her with violence. He didn't like Emily's outfit. He thought it was too revealing. He dismissed the fact that Emily had broken up with him. The man wasn't going to let her go. Elliot ruined her evening, so she decided to leave. Yet her ex-boyfriend followed her. His friends heard him say, "I will kill her. I will go to prison for it and still be a millionaire. I would do 10 years. It wouldn't bother me." Turner caught up with Emily, somehow persuading her to go to his house. He said he wanted to talk in a more relaxed atmosphere. Elliot Turner lived with his parents. Perhaps that's why Emily went with him. Maybe she thought he would behave more calmly in the presence of his parents. Neighbors saw them go inside the house. The following morning, Anita Turner, Elliot's mother, called the emergency service, saying Emily was not waking up. It was about 9 a.m. Before the arrival of the ambulance, Anita listened to the operator's instructions on how to help Emily. Unfortunately, when the ambulance arrived, the only thing they could do was to state the death of Emily Longley. Anita was an Indonesian citizen who came to the UK to marry Lee Turner. When the couple had a son, they did not deny him anything, which was a big mistake. During her conversation with the emergency service operator, Anita's voice did not sound like the voice of a mother who had just found her son's girlfriend dead. She was too calm, as if nothing unusual had happened. Thousands of miles from England, in New Zealand, Emily's father, Mark, woke up at 2 in the morning and saw a bunch of missed calls from his ex-wife, Caroline, and younger daughter, Hannah. There was also a voice message from Hannah, but Mark could barely make out what she was saying. Then he heard Caroline scream in the background and her words, "Emily is dead." Mark refused to believe it. He called his mother in England. When she answered, his whole world fell apart. His mother was crying hysterically. Moments later, one of the police officers took her phone. "I'm sorry to tell you that your daughter Emily is dead," he said. Mark couldn't believe it. After all, Emily was sitting on his couch and smiling just a week ago, flying to the UK. The grief-stricken father still refused to believe that his daughter was dead. But unfortunately, it wasn't a dream. The loss of the eldest daughter was a heartbreaking challenge for Emily's parents. The police told them that Emily had died in her sleep. It didn't make any sense. She was young and healthy. The police collected some evidence, but it was unclear what happened to Emily. They had to wait for the autopsy results. Elliot Turner's parents, Anita and Lee, told investigators they had been home all night and had not heard anything suspicious. Elliot publicly mourned Emily by posting photos of them together on his Facebook page. The police had nothing bulletproof to refute the story of Turner and his parents that Emily mysteriously died in her sleep. During the investigation of any death, the main factor is to determine the cause of it. When investigators discover the cause of the victim's death, they understand what they are dealing with and how to conduct an investigation. While waiting for the autopsy results, the investigators found out that a few days before her death, Emily had posted something strange on her Facebook page. "I have a stalker," she added. "Someone just called me and I was like, 'Who's this?' And they were like, 'You don't know me, but I know everything about you.' And I was like, 'How did you get my number?' And he was like, 'I'll tell you when I see you,' and kept asking me out. So I hung up and they won't stop calling." Emily wrote on Thursday, May 5th. At the same time, the police managed to find out that before her death, Emily quarreled with Elliot Turner in front of other nightclub guests. After interviewing Turner's friends, investigators learned that he tried to control Emily's every move, that he found out about her meeting with another man, and most importantly, that Elliot threatened to take her life many times. But his friends did not attach any importance to this, believing that these were just words with which Turner strengthened his image of a gangster. The autopsy did not give an exact cause of Emily's death. However, experts mentioned it could be strangulation. And one of them said, the physical findings are entirely consistent with pressure being applied to the neck. Investigators believed that one of the Turner family members could be involved in Emily's death, so they decided to install listening devices in their house. The police were hoping to find out if they were hiding anything, and they were right to do that. They heard Elliot instructing his mother on how to behave with the police and what she needed to say. His father, Lee Turner, seemed to be the only person who understood what he was doing was wrong. But eventually, he submitted to the will of his son and wife. While listening to the recordings, investigators also heard what happened to Emily Longley. Elliot Turner admitted that he caused her death. They arrested Elliot Turner a week after Emily's death. He, of course, denied his guilt. His lawyers tried to challenge the authenticity of those audio recordings. However, having studied all aspects of this case, the judge allowed the prosecution to use the recordings as evidence. Not knowing the police were listening, Elliot admitted that he felt angry every day and that no one had ever pissed him off as much as Emily. During the trial in May 2012, his lawyer stated that their client acted in self-defense. Elliot Turner said that the quarrel in his bedroom turned violent and he had to grab Emily by the neck. He said he didn't strangle her. He just found her dead in his bed the next morning. During the second day of the trial, Turner told the court that he was disgusted by his actions that night. Allegedly, after finding Emily dead, he wrote a letter to his mother saying how ashamed he was and that he was leaving for Spain. One can assume Elliot Turner was going to leave the country on the day of Emily's death, but changed his mind for some reason. When the police arrived at Turner's home after the 999 call, they saw packed bags. Elliot's passport was in his pocket. He admitted in court that he had threatened Emily and felt upset and deceived the night before her death after seeing false emails on her phone saying he had smashed her face into a table. When describing the fight they had before her death, he mentioned Emily started beating him with her hands and feet. He tried to calm her down before giving up and throwing her a 20-pound note for a cab. He said, "She just ignored me at first. Then 5 seconds later, she just went crazy. I had never seen Emily get to that point of rage. I didn't know what to do. She would not stop. I kept repeating myself, 'Stop it. Calm down.' At that point, I grabbed her by the neck using my right hand." Defense counsel Anthony Dunn asked, "Why did you do that?" Turner replied, "To stop her going nuts. I did not know what to do. My right hand made contact with her neck." When the defense counsel asked how hard he grabbed her, Turner replied, "I would not say very hard, but it was quite hard. I grabbed her and pushed her down onto the bed. I pressed down on her neck when she was in the lying down position." He said he held her there for 5 or 6 seconds, then let go and stormed out of the room. When asked if he intended to kill Emily, Turner replied, "No." He said he thought Emily had gone to sleep. Allegedly, he realized Emily was dead only when she did not wake up the following morning. In an interview with the Herald newspaper, Emily's father, Mark, spoke about how hard it was for him to lose his daughter. "Here is the thing about death, it sucks. It doesn't matter if it is your child, your partner, or your 99-year-old grandmother. It sucks that a person is there one day and not the next. Well, it is not something we can deal with easily. All anniversaries are hard. Birthdays are hard. Christmas is hard. Easter is also tough because it was the last time I really spent time with her," Mark Longley said. He said the heaviest part was that he would never see the woman she could have become. "I miss seeing the life she was denied unfold. We had a brief glimpse of the woman she was becoming, and I was so proud of her. I am her father, and of course I'm biased, but the world really was a better place with her in it. It was certainly a lot more fun." At the trial, they portrayed Elliot Turner as a spoiled, wealthy kid whose parents wanted to help him escape punishment. The court heard he was given the run of the family's home in the affluent Queen's Park area of Bournemouth, where he would hold parties for his middle-class friends. Described as wild by his father, Lee, he was given his own living space in the converted garage of his parents' house, so he could come and go without disturbing them. It was in his room, which had its own mini-bar, that he strangled Emily on his bed. The police examined the computers seized from Turner and found the following search queries: death by strangulation and how to avoid punishment for a crime. The main motive of the crime was jealousy. The court heard testimony from Luke Ashford, who spent the night with Emily. As already mentioned, Elliot Turner found out about it. Even while in custody, Turner boasted that the jury would believe his twisted story that Emily had attacked him, and he had acted in self-defense when he strangled her in a fit of jealousy. In letters from his prison cell to his friends, he said he would soon drive the new Range Rover and move to Spain. He planned to sell the rights to his story and live a fashionable life. However, the jury quickly shattered his illusions when they found him guilty. On May 22, 2012, the court sentenced Elliot Turner to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years. Announcing the verdict, Mrs. Justice Dobbs described Turner as a man of striking arrogance. She said, "Emily was a lovely, kind, fun-loving girl who brought a ray of sunshine to those she touched. That light has been extinguished suddenly and needlessly by you. You did not love her. She was just a trophy. The relationship, if it can be called that, was all about you. It was about control you carried out using aggression and threats. You can put away thoughts of champagne, Bentleys, and girls and concentrate on the reason you are serving a life sentence." Mrs. Justice Dobbs also sentenced Turner to 9 months to run concurrently for perverting the course of justice. But Elliot Turner wasn't the only person on trial. His parents, Anita and Lee, whom Turner used for cash to fund his lavish partying, loved their son so much they tried to cover his crime. Lee destroyed Turner's confession letter, and Anita took the jacket from the bedroom where the letter allegedly was. His mother even postponed calling an ambulance so her son could cover his tracks and let the family come up with a convincing story for the police. When asked why she did not call an ambulance, Anita Turner replied that she did not believe Emily was dead. Under cross-examination, they asked her if she thought Emily had ruined her son's life. After a pause of 6 seconds, she replied, "No." In the recording, Lee asked Anita whether they had done the right thing. "We've done the right thing," Anita replied. Both 51-year-old Anita Turner and 54-year-old Lee Turner were found guilty of perverting the course of justice and sentenced to 27 months in prison. Mrs. Justice Linda Dobbs said, "The two of you chose to fight the case showing little remorse. Mr. Turner, you claimed you didn't know the contents of the letter when you destroyed it. But the fact it was burning on your conscience is quite evident from your anguished tone of voice on the tape." Released in 2013 after serving half of their sentence, they still live in the house where Emily Longley died. Emily's dad, Mark, broke down as he spoke about the verdicts after the case. Supported by former wife Caroline and daughter Hannah, he said, "What we have heard over these 5 weeks has shocked us and disgusted us. That a man so evil like Turner could treat a gentle and loving girl like Emily so violently is beyond belief. We are so proud of the fact that she had come halfway around the world to cause a better life for herself. This is a life Turner decided to end." Mark said there was a lot of talk about Turner's boasting and that no one had taken his threats seriously until it was too late. He added, even his mother did not take him seriously when he texted her to tell her he was going to break Emily's neck. Perhaps if someone had taken his threats seriously, Emily might be with us today. I hope Turner suffers every day in prison for what he has done. In October 2020, the press reported that Elliot Turner's cellmates had beaten him in prison. It happened after he hung up photos of Emily in his cell and boasted of receiving letters from female fans. Some of his cellmates attacked him after he said he would soon return to his life full of champagne, Bentleys, and birds. In 5 years, Turner will have the right to apply for early release from prison. One can only hope that common sense will prevail and that the parole board will make the right decision regarding a person who still has no remorse for his actions.